All right, next question. How do we teach classes that are more advanced than our current skills or knowledge level?
Buy books by people that have more skills and knowledge than you have, or find people that you know that they can, learn from. Or, there's times, where people have asked my dad or maybe even me at times where they were trying to do computer programming and the parents didn't really know it, and they were running into some trouble, so they know that that's what we do for a living, and so they come in and ask questions like that where they get stuck and the resources are not sufficient.
One thing related to what he just said is also, and this goes back to socialization, if you make your child, and I've had this happen a number of times where children have come up and asked me math questions or programming questions or science questions or all kinds of questions because they've exceeded their parents' knowledge in that area. That's very common. Think about that from a couple different things. First of all, they've exceeded you, which is a great blessing. The other thing is they're learning how to deal with things in the real world. In the real world, what you do is you got to talk to the person who knows rather than just talking to the saying this one person has to be the expert. So that's one thing. The other thing I wanted to say is I have a friend who used to be he's a college professor at Bob Jones now, but he used to be at NC State. And he would find out what classes he was going to teach in something like, he was an adjunct professor, and he would find out in like August what classes he was going to teach. And they were on subjects that he didn't know anything about. But he had a PhD in computer science, so they said, you're supposed to know about this. So the way he would teach them is he would stay one page ahead. That's how you teach them things you don't know, is you stay one page ahead, and you can teach them. It's not that hard. And then you go, wait a second, like Charles said before, I'm just staying one page ahead of you. Why don't you just read it yourself? And if you've taught them to read and taught them to think, then they don't need you there to help them.
I do think that's a big part of it is, it's not a problem for a while in education in the sense that, you've got a lot of, but if you've got older children, if the child really has an interest in a subject and they really want to pursue it, they've got to move beyond teachers anyway. And if the only reason they want to know it is just for personal purposes and they're demanding that you teach them, there really is starting to be a problem there in the sense of, It's kind of like, I want to understand this, but I don't want to understand how to understand it. And there's a part of it where that's where they need to focus their time, and they need to build up sufficient skill in other areas until their other areas can match their interests. And then they can continue to move ahead. So sometimes you have a child who's very bright, he's like a sponge, and you've seen these people before. They know a lot in the subject, but they don't have practical skills. And it's forcing them to develop and round out those other skills so that they can continue to learn. And I think that's a useful way to manage it, is forcing them to be more disciplined.
And it's always better to teach your children how to learn than to actually teach them the material, because there's a lot of things you encounter in your life, I'm sure everyone knows this, where you have to learn it yourself, and if you can teach children to do that, they can learn whatever they need to know.
And you'll find that so my guess is you're talking about subjects that your child really has an aptitude for, or you think they really need to know but you're lacking somehow or other. So yeah, you can have that one approach where you're staying one page ahead. You do not have to know all of Algebra 2 before you teach Algebra 2. You just have to know a chapter ahead of your child. And if you're struggling with something, somebody on YouTube has done a how to do a quadratic equation. So there's resources for you to stay. Or you say, hey, you know what? I watched this video, son. This was a really helpful video. Today, your math is going to be to watch this video on how to do quadratic equations. And so basically, on one hand, you're teaching. On the other hand, you're helping your child find the right resources. And that happens with older children, but it's surprising. It's going to start happening with younger children as they start developing interests that are worth pursuing, that are worth learning. The world's a big and wonderful and crazy place, and there's more in it than any one of us can grasp and hold. My 6-year-old knows more about butterflies than I do. He knows more about them because he cares about them, because my wife has planted a whole bunch of plants that attract butterflies, and he goes and he collects the caterpillars, and then he says, hey, I want to know what this one is. And he looks things up in field guides. My 6-year-old is more adept in his insect morphology than I am because he cared about something and because we were able to find resources that we could put in front of him that he could use. And he doesn't even think that he's doing school. And that's really the best.
Part of this goes back to, and in a few minutes here, I'm going to talk about setting goals for your homeschooling. But one of the goals for the homeschooling is for them not to be dependent on you. If they are, when they're 26, they'll be living in your basement. The goal is to teach them to be dependent upon themselves and to rely on themselves. And part of that transition happens when you go, I don't know what that butterfly is. You should go look it up in a book. You're preparing them to not live in your basement when they're 26. And that's a good thing, and you should be doing that. And so don't look at it and go, oh, no, I can't teach them that. Go, this is part of training them to be separate individuals. This is training them to be adults, because adults, you don't want them when they're 30 to say, Dad, how do I do this? I don't know how to look it up. I saw this interesting bug. I want to know what bug it is. No, you want them to be able to find things for themselves. And this is a very controlled, very easy, very low-risk way for them to do that. And so the goal is to transition them to that.
I mean, the other part of it is you also teach them that there's a cost to knowledge. And, you know what I mean? Like, when we first started off homeschooling, there were certain things we wanted all the kids to know. And some of them weren't really practical. And we spent a lot of time trying to make sure they continued to know them and remember. And it took effort for them to continue like we wanted them to know all the capitals of all the countries and the countries in the world, but there's a lot of countries in the world, and
they change.
and they change, and so we still like spending a lot of time on geography, but I don't know that we're spending as much, and so there is this part when your kid comes and asks you a question, it's a shortcut to an answer, and sometimes you find yourself spending 10 minutes on Wikipedia to answer their question, and the answer is sometimes it's not worth finding out the answer, because that's part of them learning that is this worth learning?